Okay, so yes, when rendering your props, I usually recommend doing a couple things first. Going to display, heads up display, and then going into the polycount option and making sure that's enabled first. So it will show you how many faces are there. Even if you do smoothing, just to help improve the mesh, it will show that polycount. So if I hit this and hit 3, right, the polycount now suddenly jumps up. But there's kind of a neat trick to this where if you hit cage, it will maintain the original polycount while allowing you to show the smoother, higher res version. Because typically this is something that's only done at render time, but the true base resolution is still there. So making sure you adjust that under display, heads up display, polycount in the options. Also, I typically want to set up my render resolution by going into render options, and then I'll go to HD 1080. You may also want to rotate your object 90 degrees, just so if it's longer, we want to kind of get as much of a good view of this kind of longer object. So since our frame is wider, it probably would be smarter in this case to have this object rotate on this sort of axis. Next up, we want to set up the framing. So I'm going to turn on the film gate, and I want to turn on a resolution gate. So I get the true kind of 1920 by 1080 view of that object. So again, I usually like to sort of frame things up first. So I'll hit F and zoom out a bit, and then I'll sort of rotate the object just to sort of see. I typically want to avoid any cutoff if I can. So I think this is okay as a sort of framing point. So what I'll do next with this selected is go to animation mode, visualize, create turntable, and again I'll select the options box for that and set this to 240. Hit apply, and what it does is it kind of creates a camera group and automatically does a rotation. So again, I'll set this to 240 frames down here on my timeline and make sure my full time slider is going to reach that. One thing that will happen most likely is that you'll have a slow in, slow out, meaning that there's kind of like automatic curve softening or curve slowing happening. So you will want to select the camera group. This is the camera group, by the way, group 1. Go to Window, Animation Editor, Graph Editor, select the keys, and then we'll just set them to linear. So we get a constant rate of speed in the turn. So it's just going to be forever on a loop. Next up, I want to make sure I'm actually looking through this. I'm going to go to Panels, make sure I'm in Turntable 1, and I'll select that camera. And under the camera shape, go down to Display, Options. Make sure Overscan is set to 1, because normally you'll get this kind of like masked out border that we're currently seeing. But if I set Overscan to 1, this will kind of eliminate that excess framing. A few other steps here we can do is to turn on multi-sample anti-aliasing. I usually will go into render and then just simply to render options under viewport 2.0. And I'll go into anti-aliasing. So I want to usually max these sample settings out. So set that to 16 and smooth wireframe. And I'll simply hit close. So we'll get a much kind of crisper, cleaner, almost professional grade rendering, but at real time for this. Final steps here, go to Play Blast, right click on your timeline, go to Play Blast, but again, go to the options box. So I'm going to go to Format, set it to QuickTime, and set this to H.264. Quality, max it out, 100%. Display size, this is why I set my render settings to full HD, so I can go in and say from render settings. Scaling too sometimes is set to 0.5, so quality we want maxed out, scale we want full scale, and will simply tell us to save a file. So it should go into my kind of default projects here. So let me just copy the path in case I forget. So I'll hit Play Blast. Okay, so I've got the Play Blast recorded, and it looks pretty good, and it shows me my resolution, my mesh resolution. The next steps are pretty simple and pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go to back to the object itself. This time I just want to sort of show almost like an ambient occlusion edition of the model. So go to the attribute editor of the mesh, and under surface I'm going to simply switch this to Lambert and make it a fairly light white Lambert. And again, you can turn on ambient occlusion by clicking on a little icon here in the viewport. It's sort of like a sphere with a little green kind of shaded pad under it. So I'll turn it on. I usually will exaggerate this a bit inside of the settings under viewport 2.0. Screen space ambient occlusion, you can crank the amount if you like. In this case, I'm not seeing too much, but it may help to increase the radius as well, so you can try to adjust those settings as you see fit. And usually, again, I max my samples up to 32. So it's basically going to be the same turntable. Again, I may just rename my my clip here. So I'll say Blinn underscore turntable. And then I'll simply play blast this again. It should have the same settings, so I'll just hit play blast. So there's the turntable for that now, and it looks pretty good as well. So again, pretty decent look. And again, it's usually going to be lightweight in size. It's going to be something that, you know, typically, I mean, it's 5 megs, 3 megs, 5 megs per turntable. So I'll say AO turntable. And then for the final one, I'm going to do wireframe. So what I want to do is actually enable the wireframe in the viewport. And currently the wireframe is blue, which I find, again, usually not too appealing. So I'll typically go into Windows, Settings and Preferences, Color Settings, and under Inactive Selection, because this is an inactive object selection, under Polygon Surfaces, you can set this to black and hit Save. And again, I'll simply right-click Play Blast. So yeah, I mean, during the rendering, it may look kind of low res, but usually on final export and at high res, it should look pretty good for the most part. And we should be able to kind of pause and sort of see the wireframe.